Hello and welcome to BNC TV Presents a Spotlight on Yolanda Merchant. She is an artist based out of New York and Northfield, Massachusetts. She has an exhibit currently up at the bank building here in Northfield called Winter Landscapes and Still Lifes. Thank you for coming on the show, Yolanda.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Would you tell our viewers just a little bit about your background as a painter and as an artist?
Okay. So I guess I was pretty determined to be an artist. I wanted to be an artist from the time I was 5 years old. I remember telling my friends that I couldn't go out to play at 5 because I had to give a painting class. So that was pretty much, an orientation that I always had. And I grew up at the very end of Long Island. I grew up in Southampton, which when I was there was predominantly a farming community. So it was mostly farmers and fishermen. And it was also a hub for artists. And I became friends with a lot of the children of artists, Fairfield Porter, de Kooning. All these artists were living and working there, and I was going to school with their children and going to Girl Scouts. So I got to go over to their homes and actually, see how artists lived. How they were putting paint on their palettes and, making oatmeal at the same time. So that was a very special experience.
And it seems like there might be a connection between some of painters like Fairfield Porter in that he was a figurative painter, painting a lot of landscapes, but with influence from the New York School and abstract expressionism. Is that fair to sort of characterize your work in that way?
Yeah, and Fairfield was actually a member of the New York School of Painters and Poets, which was a, sort of an intellectual enclave. But it was also the hub of a lot of abstract expressionists, which Porter was not included in.
Right.
Like de Kooning, although those guys played chess together and would see each other, they weren't really part of his little niche.
Yeah. And it seems like one of the things that Southampton and the Hamptons in general have in common with Western Mass is a rural character. Is that part of what brought you to Northfield?
Yes. I mean, when I applied to Northfield, it was Northfield School for Girls, and when I came up, or in the middle, they was all of a sudden Northfield Mount Hermon, and there were 20 boys on the Northfield campus, so that was a little bit of a shock. I had there was a group of girls traditionally that had come from Eastern Long Island, the Mills from Greenport, the Herricks from Southampton, and we would travel up back and forth together, take the ferry together, and go back and forth. So I was influenced by that group and their traditions with the school, but also the beautiful landscapes. We don't have very tall pines and soft mountains in Long Island, but the agricultural community and the sort of sense of trust and support that comes from that kind of community. I mean, a farmer puts a seed and he has to have the faith that it's going to grow into a stalk of corn. So there's a certain amount of trust and religion just in that. I also grew up, I'm Catholic, I'm Cuban born. I grew up in a fairly religious household. My father passed away. My mother was a college professor, and I grew up with my grandmother. And so religion was always a part of my life, and the fact that D.L. Moody had founded the school, you could really see that kind of benevolence that he exuded in the town of Northfield. So one of the things that really drew me to Northfield School for Girls was the history of D.L. Moody and his interest in educating women. He was really inspired by the farming families that couldn't afford to educate their daughters. So the first school was Northfield, and I loved that sense of generosity and goodwill. And I think that even today, the town of Northfield is still sort of driven by that sense of morality and trying to do the right thing and goodwill. So that's that's what brought me to the school. And then
So that's some of the values behind your work, but maybe let's move on to talk about the work specifically. And this exhibit in particular shows a rural character, which I would think has something to do with the time that you spend in Northfield. Can you talk about your process and where you work to, like these pastels, for instance, were they done in the studio or were they done on location?
Right. So all of these are done from life. I tend to prefer to paint and draw from life. So that is, a very special kind of experience because you have to have the right setting, can't be interrupted, that kind of thing. When I came to Northfield, I had the goodwill to fall into the realm of Doug Jones, who was the head of the art department. And he sort of nurtured me. He taught me how to draw. We would go outside and sit on the hill and draw and do watercolors of the pine trees. And he really taught me an appreciation for line and form and color. So that's very exciting to be back here where he lived out his days. Many of his paintings are on the Northfield Mount Herman campus, but also in the library. They've devoted a art room to him where they do exhibitions. So he was a huge influence on my life, and I was fortunate enough. I'm sure you know that Northfield Mount Herman has like a work program where everyone does something. Now, my first job was washing pots and pans, and then fortunately I met Doug, and I was made sort of the overseer of the art center. So my job was to basically be there during study hall and supervise and help the students. So.
And you exhibited once before in Northfield, is that correct?
I did. I mean, other than the fact that I exhibited while I was a student,
Sure.
I think I did a retrospective in 1996 at the new sort of gallery on the Northfield campus. And that was really my work starting from the time I was a student at Northfield all through the present day. So that was very exciting. I think there were over 30 pieces.
Yeah, and you had a series of self-portraits, I know, from the 90s. Were some of that work included in that exhibit, or did that come later?
I think it came later.
I was just curious about where your art has gone since then.
Right, no. So I did have an exhibit at the Butler Institute for American Art, which is in Youngstown, Ohio. And they used one of the self-portraits as the card, and and I'm doing another exhibition with them, hopefully next year. So I've been very fortunate to be able to. I am in 3 museum collections, one of them being the Butler, to have done these retrospectives, and I'm continuing now to do a series of self-portraits. And my intent there is to really capture the emotion, and that's the case with these also.
Yeah.
I mean, even though I want them to have a sense of, cohesiveness and balance and beauty, I also want them to have emotions, so that for example, the still life flowers were mostly done at the National Arts Club in New York, where I spend a good bit of time. And it was not just showing a flower or even showing a tree, but having a sense of emotion come through that.
Yeah, and I think that comes through. I think there's a lot of gesture in the pastels, and I think some of them, especially the not the flowers, but the woodland pictures, kind of convey a sense of movement.
Right, and I had never really painted a snowstorm before.
Sure.
So I'm there watching the snowstorm and thinking, okay, I'm going to give this a go.
How do you do this? Yeah, it seems
Right, and because
hard.
I have a fairly classical training, I mean, other than, well, I went to Northfield Mount Hermon, and from there I went to Hampshire, and I studied in Paris for a year. After that, I went to work with a teacher named Simi in Florence, who taught anagomi, and she would use black mirrors and weights to depict something accurately.
Yeah.
And it's a style of drawing that's really not known or not taught in the United States. I'd like to start teaching it. But underneath all these drawings, even this one, which may look very abstract, there is a very solid, realistic drawing.
I was going to ask about that because that was part of my wondering about your process. So it starts there with draftsmanship, and then you work from there.
I don't mind losing the drawing completely because then I'm looking at light and shade and emotion and atmosphere. Right. So I mean, I could have gone back and said, "Oh gosh, nobody will think that's a tree," but I didn't worry about that. I was more intent on the process. Yeah. And the other thing is, I think I mentioned, I paint from the subconscious. So one of the reasons I can't paint on the side of the road is that I would lose my sense of self and probably walk out in front of the road. Yeah. When my daughter was going riding in the summer, for example, I'd be covered in paint, and I'd have to wait half an hour to sort of, come down or find myself. I mean, Van Gogh painted from the subconscious, but he had to get drunk, and I'm not getting drunk. I'm just being very focused, and that sense of focus takes me to that place. So it isn't until I've finished the piece and I've sort of gathered my sense of self, and I go back to critique it from a sense of cohesiveness and just values, that I make adjustments. But for the most part, what I'm painting is sheerly from a subconscious base.
Yeah, and I think that comes through. I mean, not only does the draftsmanship that might not be visible, but it kind of is a beginning of the process. I think that is part of the work, even if you can't see it. And then it sounds like the state that you're in, your subconscious, all of this, I think comes across.
Really?
In
well,
the work
thank
as well.
I mean, I normally have to explain it to people and how dangerous it is for me to paint on the side of the road. But I it's a very meditative process for me, and I'm so thrilled to be painting every day, and I'm inspired to be here. I mean, I love the area. I love the town of Northfield. I mean, I would come back here after I graduated with my children to ski at Northfield Mountain, and at that point we were able to use the Moody Cottage to rent it for the weekend. So that was very special. So I got to like the town and the townspeople, apart from my experience as a student and just that time frame.
Yeah. Would you tell us a little bit about the reception that's going to happen here on Friday?
Yes. So there will be an article in the Greenfield Recorder, which is going to run on Thursday. And then on Friday, we're having a closing reception, which you're all welcome to come, from 4 to 6. Again, this is the Cooperative Bank building on Main Street in Northfield. And please join us. It's a celebration of these works, and as I said, half of them, or more than half, are landscapes from the vicinity, all painted from life, and then the other half are these flowers, which were painted at the National Arts Club. They're mostly titled homage to Hockney, because David Hockney did a black vase that's at the Metropolitan, and there was recently an overview of his work at the Met in January.
It was incredible. Yeah, I saw it.
Did you see it? Oh, yeah. It was a great show.
It was lovely.
Yeah, and when I saw that black vase, I said, oh, my goodness, I have one. So, so I'm very happy to be back in the area, and just find it so inspiring to look at the beautiful pine trees. I mean, every time I see a pine tree, I'm like, oh, I want to stop and study it, because it takes a lot of time and affection to really, it's not an automatic drawing, so it takes a lot of observation to really capture the sense of the trees and the environment.
And it's only fair because it took so many decades for the tree to get where
it
is.
True.
So you have to do
and
it some
those tall
justice.
trees and rolling mountains, it's just spectacular here. It really is. So
Well, thanks so much for talking with us,
Thank you so
Yolanda.
much.
This has been lovely, and everyone should check out the exhibit and come by for the reception on Friday and look at Yolanda's work in general. So this has been a Spotlight on Yolanda Merchant, presented by BNC TV. I'm Otis Wheeler. Thank you for joining us.